They mistook my silence for submission. When my husband's text lit up my screen claiming he was stuck at his mother's for dinner, he had no idea I was sitting 3 tables away. I took a slow sip of wine that cost more than his monthly paycheck, watching him celebrate my destruction with my own family. I decided right then that I would not scream or make a scene. I would simply dismantle their entire existence. My name is Alara Reed. At 32 years old, I am the senior crisis manager at Obsidian Shield Strategies in Chicago. My profession dictates that I remain the calmest person in the room while everyone else is running around with their hair on fire. I clean up messes. I bury scandals. I make problems disappear for the elite. Most importantly, I never let emotion cloud my judgment. Tonight, however, the crisis was not corporate, but personal. I was sitting in a secluded booth at the Gilded Fork, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. My client, a tech CEO with a penchant for insider trading, had canceled our 7:30 meeting at the last minute. I decided to stay. The shadows in the back corner offered a perfect vantage point, shielding me from the main dining floor. I had just ordered a glass of wine when the hostess led a trio to a table in the center of the room. I froze. It was Jason. My husband was supposed to be at his mother's house in the suburbs. Yet, here he was, wearing his best navy blazer, looking more alive than he had in months. He was not alone. Walking beside him, laughing at something he said, was Sarah, my baby sister. Trailing them was a man I did not recognize, though his sharp features and the leather briefcase clutched to his chest screamed attorney. My phone vibrated against the white tablecloth. I glanced down. It was a message from Jason. Stuck at Mom's for dinner. She is talking too much, so I cannot leave early. Love you, love. I looked from the glowing screen to the man sitting 40 feet away. He was pulling out a chair for Sarah. The disconnect between the digital lie and the physical reality was jarring, but I did not gasp. I did not cry. My heart rate remained steady. I simply watched. They looked like a celebration. The waiter brought a bottle of Dom Perignon. Jason ordered it with a confident wave of his hand. This was a man who claimed we needed to save money for a rainy day. Yet here he was, spending $500 on bubbles. The strange man opened the briefcase and slid a thick stack of documents onto the table. The atmosphere shifted. It was no longer just a dinner. It was a transaction. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on their lips. Lip reading is a necessary skill in my line of work, especially when dealing with boardrooms that are supposedly soundproof. I watched the lawyer speak first. He tapped the paper. The inheritance structure is complex. I deciphered his movements. Jason leaned in, his face flush with greed. But the power of attorney covers it if she signs. Yes, the lawyer replied. Sarah laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that I could almost hear over the din of the restaurant. She raised her flute of champagne. That idiot has no idea what she is sitting on. The glass in my hand felt cold. That idiot? That was me. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying precision. This was not a sordid affair of the flesh. It was much worse. It was a financial execution. They were after the commercial land my grandmother had left me, a dormant asset I had kept separate from our marital finances. Jason had always dismissed it as a worthless lot, but clearly, he had done his homework. Or rather, they had. I watched them toast. They were toasting to my ruin. They were celebrating the theft of my future. Rage is a hot, messy emotion. I do not do messy. I felt a cold, metallic resolve settle in my chest. I signaled the waiter with a subtle nod. When he arrived, I handed him my black card. Close it out. I whispered, and add a 30% tip. While the waiter processed the card, I lifted my phone one last time. I did not zoom in. I framed the shot perfectly. Jason's hand on Sarah's shoulder, the lawyer pointing at the signature line, and the champagne bubbling in their glasses. Click. I had the evidence. Now I needed the plan. I slipped out the side entrance before they could turn their heads. The cool Chicago wind hit my face, drying the sweat I had not realized was forming on my brow. Jason thought he was playing a game of checkers. He had no idea he had just sat down at a chessboard with a grandmaster. I arrived back at our penthouse just after midnight. I sat in the living room with a book open on my lap, though I had not read a single page. When the front door finally clicked open, Jason stumbled in. The scent of scotch and expensive cologne preceded him, masking the stale air of betrayal. He loosed his tie, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Baby." "I am so sorry," he slurred, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Mom just would not let me leave. She kept going on about her garden. It was a nightmare." I looked at him, summoning every ounce of discipline I possessed to keep my expression soft. "It is okay. Honey, go to sleep. You look exhausted." He kissed my forehead with lips that tasted of lies and stumbled toward the bedroom. I waited until his breathing turned into the heavy, rhythmic snore of the deeply intoxicated before I moved. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark, plotting. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I walked into my office at Obsidian Shield Strategies. I locked the glass door and deactivated the privacy frosting. I was not billing hours for a client today. Today, I was my own client. I logged into the Onyx system, our proprietary data mining tool usually reserved for vetting political candidates or uncovering corporate espionage. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. First, I pulled the last 12 months of activity from our joint bank accounts. Jason was careful, but not careful enough for a forensic audit. I noticed a pattern of microtransactions. $200 here, $300 there. They were small enough to escape casual notice, but, when aggregated, amounted to over $15,000 in 6 months. The recipient was an LLC called Blue Horizon Ventures. I opened a new command window, Query Entity Blue Horizon Ventures. The results populated instantly. It was a shell company registered in Delaware. The primary shareholder was Sarah Miller, my sister. I felt a cold spike in my chest, but I pushed it down. I needed data, not feelings. I ran a deep financial diagnostic on Sarah. The screen filled with red flags. My sister was drowning. She had racked up over $80,000 in debt across 3 different online gambling platforms. She was desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I dug deeper into the corporate filings for Blue Horizon Ventures. The company had no revenue, no assets, and no employees. However, it did have a loan application pending with a private lender. I clicked on the guarantor documents. There, at the bottom of the page, was my signature. It was a good forgery, likely traced from a birthday card or a check, but the stroke weight was wrong. Sarah had used my name to secure a line of credit she could never repay. Next, I uploaded the photo I had taken at the restaurant. I cropped the face of the stranger and ran it through our facial recognition database. It took 3 seconds. Match found Robert Thorne, attorney at law. Thorne was a bottom feeder. He specialized in contested wills and aggressive real estate litigation. His license had been suspended twice for ethical violations. Why was Jason dining with a shark like Thorne? I cross-referenced Thorne's recent search history accessed through a backdoor in legal databases with my own assets. The connection lit up like a flare. The commercial lot. My grandmother had left me a dilapidated warehouse in the meatpacking district. Jason had always called it a dump. I checked the city zoning server. A proposal had been filed last week to rezone that entire block for a new tech stadium. The value of my dump had just multiplied by 500%, but I owned it. It was separate property. They could not touch it, unless... I scanned the documents Thorne had on the table in the photo again, enhancing the resolution. I could make out the header on the top sheet, Petition for Involuntary Conservatorship. My blood turned to ice. They were not just trying to steal from me. They were planning to declare me mentally incompetent. They wanted to argue that I was unfit to manage my assets so Jason could take control as my guardian. That explained the gaslighting. They needed me to look unstable. You want to play spy games. Jason, I whispered to the empty office. Let's see who plays better. I opened my briefcase and took out a tactical surveillance kit. I had 3 bugs microtransmitters smaller than a dime. During my lunch break, I drove to our parking garage. I slipped one device under the driver's seat of Jason's Tesla and another behind the dashboard. The third one, I would plant inside his phone case while he showered. I put on my headset and synced the audio feed to my secure cloud server. The game had officially begun. The psychological warfare began with small, calculated strikes. Jason started moving my things. I would leave my keys on the console table, and he would hide them in the couch cushions. He would turn off the coffee maker after I had set the timer, so I woke up to a cold pot. Then, the concern trolling started. "Ilara, you look exhausted," Jason said one evening, his voice dripping with synthetic worry. "Did you forget our anniversary was next week? You have been so scattered lately." Sarah was always there, echoing him like a Greek chorus of deceit. "Sis, maybe you are taking on too much at work. You are forgetting things. Mom is worried about your memory." I played my part to perfection. I let my shoulders slump. I rubbed my temples as if fighting a migraine. I intentionally left my phone in the fridge so they would find it. I do not know what is happening to me. I stammered during breakfast, letting my hand tremble as I held my coffee cup. "I feel so lost." They exchanged a glance. It was a look of predatory satisfaction. They thought the walls were closing in on me, but I was the one building the maze. The trap snapped shut during Sunday dinner. Sarah had invited herself over, bringing a lasagna and an agenda. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and leaned forward, her face a mask of sisterly love. "Ilara, Jason and I were talking," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her palm was damp. "We think it might be good for you to take a break from the finances. Just for a while. Maybe sign a power of attorney to Jason, just so he can handle the bills and the estate while you rest. You know, to reduce your stress." I looked at Jason. He was watching me with the intensity of a wolf eyeing a wounded deer. I lowered my eyes to my plate. Maybe you are right. The paperwork, the land Grandma left. It is all so confusing right now. I just want to sleep." Jason exhaled, a sound of pure relief. "It is for the best. Babe, I will take care of everything." The next morning, I was not sleeping. I was sitting in the corner office of Marcus Vance, the most ruthless litigator in Chicago. Marcus was a shark in a 3-piece suit who cost $800 an hour, and he was worth every penny. "You were right," Marcus said, sliding a dossier across his mahogany desk. "Jason took out a second mortgage on your penthouse 3 weeks ago. He forged your signature. The bank missed it because the notary was bribed. I flipped through the pages. Jason had leveraged our home for $500,000. He had dumped every cent into Robert Thorne's real estate fund. The irony was bitter. Jason was trying to steal my inheritance, but Thorne was already stealing Jason's stolen money. My husband was a con man getting conned." "Do we strike now?" Marcus asked, uncapping his pen. "No," I said, staring at the numbers. "Not yet. Later that afternoon." I sat in my car and opened the audio file from the bug I had planted in Jason's Tesla. I expected to hear them discussing bank accounts or legal loopholes. Instead, I heard the rustling of clothes and the unmistakable sounds of intimacy. "Oh, God, Jason, she is so pathetic." Sarah's voice came through the speakers, breathless and mocking. "Does she suspect anything?" "She has no clue," Jason replied, his voice thick with lust. "She is a total wreck. Once I get that land, we dump her in a facility and take a trip to the Maldives, just you and me." I ripped the headphones off, my stomach churning. It was not just greed. It was a double betrayal. My husband and my sister. They were sleeping together in my car, laughing at my manufactured breakdown, planning my institutionalization. The last vestige of mercy in my heart evaporated. I did not just want to win anymore. I wanted to incinerate their world. I picked up my phone and called Marcus back. "Change of plan," I said, my voice steady and cold as liquid nitrogen. "Let him think he has the power. Draft the documents, but set up the shell corporation we discussed. I am going to let them borrow millions. They will think they are signing for a loan under my name, but the liability is going to be 100% theirs. I started the engine. They want to play house with my money. Fine, I will let them buy the rope to hang themselves. I created a ghost to haunt my husband. I named it Apex Sovereign Capital, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands with a website so polished it practically smelled of old money. I channeled my inner puppeteer and had my team at Obsidian Shield leak the investment opportunity to Robert Thorne. Thorne, ever the scavenger, took the bait immediately. He thought he had stumbled upon a unicorn investor looking for high-risk real estate projects. He had no idea the unicorn was actually a Trojan horse. 2 days later, Thorne arranged a meeting. I sat in my car outside Jason's rented office space, listening through the bug I had planted in his phone case. "This is it. Jason." Thorne's voice crackled through my speakers. "Apex wants in. They are talking about a $10 million injection. But they need to move fast. They want a signature today. 10 million. Jason sounded like he was hyperventilating. My God! I knew this land was a gold mine. Alara was sitting on a fortune and did nothing. I am going to build an empire. I smirked. The contract I had drafted through a proxy law firm was a masterpiece of legal malice. It contained a bad boy clause and an unlimited personal guarantee. It meant that when the project inevitably failed to produce the non-existent permits, the investor could seize all personal assets of the borrower to recoup the investment plus penalties. Jason did not read the fine print. He was too busy counting money he did not have. He signed his life away with a flourish of his Mont Blanc pen. Then came the squeeze. My proxy sent an email 5 minutes after the signature was verified. The investors required a proof of liquidity. They needed Jason to show $500,000 in cash as a good faith matching fund before they released the $10 million. Panic ensued. I watched the chaos unfold later that evening via the hidden camera in our living room. Jason was pacing, sweating through his shirt. "I need cash. Sarah fast." Jason yelled, running his hands through his hair. "If I do not show the matching funds by Friday, the deal dies." Sarah, ever the opportunist, looked toward my bedroom, the safe, Ilara's jewelry, Grandma's vintage collection. The sapphires alone are worth a fortune. We can't. If she notices, she is a mental wreck. Jason, she won't notice a thing. We pawn them, get the cash, show the investors, and buy them back next week with the 10 million. It is a no-brainer. I watched on my tablet, sipping an espresso, as Sarah crept into my bedroom. She picked the lock on my jewelry box with a bobby pin, a skill she likely picked up during her degenerate gambling phase. She scooped up the diamond necklace, the emerald earrings, and the vintage Cartier watch. Her eyes were wide with greed. She had no idea that I had swapped every single piece for high-quality cubic zirconia and gold-plated brass 3 weeks ago. The real collection was sitting safely in a bank deposit box downtown. Sarah was about to commit grand larceny for costume jewelry worth less than $200. To bridge the rest of the gap, Jason made a call I knew was coming. He reached out to a hard money lender, a loan shark in a suit who charged 20% interest a week. Jason borrowed $300,000, using the fake jewelry valuation and his guaranteed investment contract as collateral. He was digging a hole so deep he would see China before he saw sunlight again. While they were busy destroying themselves, I finalized my defense. I visited Dr. Aris, Chicago's leading neurologist. I underwent a full battery of cognitive tests. The results were pristine. I had a signed, notarized certificate of perfect mental health, dated 2 days before their planned intervention. Their claim that I was incapacitated would shatter the moment I produced this document. The stage was set. I sent a text to Jason from my burner phone, posing as the CEO of Apex Sovereign Capital. Review of funds complete. We are ready to execute. Let's celebrate the partnership. Dinner at the Gilded Fork, Friday night, 7 o'clock. Bring your partners. Jason read the text out loud, his voice cracking with joy. We did it. Sarah. We are rich. I closed my laptop. The Gilded Fork. The same place where I had watched them plot my demise. It was poetic. I would return to the scene of the crime, not as the victim, but as the executioner. Jason stood in the foyer, adjusting his tie with the jittery energy of a man about to commit a crime he thought was a masterstroke. He had packed a suitcase for a trip he was not taking. I hate leaving you when you are feeling so fragile. Ilara, he said, avoiding my eyes. But this conference in Detroit is crucial. I will be back on Sunday. Try to rest. Okay, don't worry your pretty little head about anything. I will be fine. Jason, I replied, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. Safe travels. Make sure you get what you deserve. He missed the double entendre entirely. He kissed my cheek and practically sprinted to the elevator. I waited exactly 30 minutes before I left the penthouse. I did not dress like the fragile, confused housewife they wanted me to be. I wore a crimson power suit that cost $4,000 and stilettos sharp enough to puncture a lung. I arrived at the Gilded Fork at 7:15. I bypassed the reservation desk entirely. The hostess started to intercept me, but the general manager, Pierre, rushed forward, his face pale. Mrs. Reed, Pierre stammered, bowing slightly. Welcome back. We were not expecting you. I like to check on my investments. Pierre, I said, breezing past him. Pierre knew what Jason did not. Last Tuesday, I had quietly purchased 51% of the restaurant's shares. I was not just a patron anymore. I was the owner. I walked straight to the VIP diamond room, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. I pushed the double oak doors open without knocking. The scene inside was almost comical. Jason, Sarah, and Robert Thorne were laughing, their heads thrown back in arrogant delight. A bottle of champagne was already open. When they saw me, the laughter died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Jason jumped up so fast his chair tipped over. Ilara, what? What are you doing here, I thought? You were at home resting. Sarah frantically threw her napkin over the stack of contracts on the table. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit. Sis! Oh my God! Sarah shrilled, her voice an octave too high. What a surprise! We just ran into each other. Robert here offered to buy us dinner. Totally a coincidence. Please, Ilara, Jason said, walking toward me with his hands up, trying to herd me out. This is a client meeting. Very boring stuff. You are not well. You are confused. Let me call you a cab. I sidestepped him and walked to the head of the table. Robert Thorne looked at me with a sneer. Mrs. Reed, Thorne said, his tone dripping with condescension. This is a private business meeting. I am afraid you are trespassing. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, crossing my legs slowly. I am not trespassing. Mr. Thorne, I own this building, I said, my voice calm and amused. And as for this meeting, Jason, you do not need to lie about Detroit. I know you are here to sign the deal with Apex Sovereign Capital. Jason froze. How? How do you know that I know? I said, picking up a breadstick and snapping it in half, because I arranged it. Before they could process my words, the door opened again. In walked the representative from Apex, a man named David who was actually the head of forensic accounting at Obsidian Shield. He was dressed in an Italian suit that cost more than Sarah's car. David walked past Jason as if he were furniture. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head respectfully. Good evening, Ms. Reed. The trap is set, and the documents are ready for your review. The silence in the room was deafening. Jason looked from David to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. "Ms." Reed Thorne whispered, the color draining from his face. "But Apex is." Apex Sovereign Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary of Obsidian Shield Strategies, I announced, leaning forward to look my husband in the eye. "I am the investor, Jason. I am the board. I am the money." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder. I dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud that made the silverware rattle. "That is not the contract you thought you were signing," I said, pointing to the folder. "That is a collection of transcripts from every text message you sent to Sarah. It is the audio recordings from the bugs in your car and your phone. And it is the bank records proving you forged my signature to mortgage our home." Sarah let out a small, strangled sound. You were spying on us." "I was not spying. Sarah." I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I had ever worn. "I was conducting a performance review, and you both failed." The silence in the VIP room shattered the moment the weight of my words settled. Jason looked at the black folder, then at me, and finally at the open door where two of my security detail were standing. His survival instinct kicked in, but it was the instinct of a rat, not a lion. He scrambled backward, knocking over his champagne flute. "Ilara, baby." "Listen to me," Jason stammered, his face slick with sweat. He pointed a trembling finger at my sister. "It was not me, it was her. It was all Sarah. She told me you were sick. She told me we had to protect the assets. I was just trying to help you. She manipulated me. She made me do it." Sarah's jaw dropped. The shock on her face quickly twisted into a snarl of pure, unfiltered hatred. She lunged at him, shoving his chest. "You spineless coward," Sarah screamed, turning her venom toward me. "Oh, look at you, Saint Ilara, sitting there like a queen. You always get everything, don't you? The brains, the money, the perfect job. Mom and Dad looked at you like you were the golden child while I was just the mistake that came after I sat perfectly still, watching her tantrum with clinical detachment. I paid off Mom and Dad's mortgage 3 years ago," I said, my voice cutting through her shrieks. "I paid your tuition for culinary school, which you quit after 2 months. I paid your rent last year when you got evicted. My success was not luck, Sarah. It was work. And your failure is not my fault. It is your choice." "I hate you," she spat, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to see you break. I wanted to see you lose everything just once, out of the corner of my eye. I saw movement." Robert Thorne was trying to slide along the wall toward the service exit, clutching his briefcase to his chest. "Sit down, Robert," I commanded without looking at him. My security guard, a massive man named Tiny, stepped in front of the door and crossed his arms. Thorne froze. "You cannot keep me here," Thorne hissed, though his voice wavered. "This is kidnapping." "No, this is a crime scene," I corrected him. "And just so you know, my team sent a courier to the State Bar Association this morning. They have the forged documents, the wire transfer records, and the proof that you knowingly facilitated fraud against a mentally competent spouse. You will be disbarred before you finish your dessert." Thorne slumped against the wall, defeated. But I was not done with the family reunion. "And since we are sharing memories," I said, picking up a remote control from the table, "let us watch my favorite home movie." I pressed the button. The 60-inch screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the footage from the night at the restaurant, recorded on my phone but enhanced by my tech team. The audio was crystal clear. On the screen, Jason was laughing, holding a glass of wine. "She is so stupid. She actually believes I am at Mom's house." Sarah's voice followed, sharp and mocking. "Once we get the power of attorney, we can dump the idiot in a care home." The video played on a loop. "She is so stupid. She is so stupid. In the room." The real Jason collapsed. He fell to his knees on the plush carpet, crawling toward me. He grabbed the hem of my skirt, sobbing like a child. "Ilara, please." "Turn it off. I am sorry I was drunk. I was confused. It was the stress." He blubbered, snot running down his nose. "We have been married for 5 years. You cannot throw that away over one mistake. I love you. We can fix this. Please, honey, do not do this." I looked down at him. I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate, just the desire to scrape something dirty off my shoe. I kicked his hand away. "Get up," I said coldly. "You look pathetic." I reached into the folder and pulled out a single, stapled document. I slid it across the table. "These are divorce papers," I stated. "I signed them this morning. And underneath is a restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of me, my home, or my office, you go to jail." Jason stared at the papers, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold them. "But the money," he whispered. "The loan. Ilara, I borrowed $300,000 from the Sharks. I told them I had the investment coming. If I do not pay them back by Monday..." I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "That sounds like a personal problem." "Jason," I said, looking down at him one last time. "The loan shark is a man named Vinny. My sources tell me he is very strict about deadlines. He is currently looking for you. I suggest you start running. Vinny is certainly a problem." "Jason," I said, stepping back as he tried to grab my hand again. "But he is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight. You have a date with the Chicago Police Department." Jason blinked, his face gray. "Police? What?" "You forged my signature on a mortgage application." I explained, my voice devoid of pity. "That is bank fraud. It is a federal crime. And since you used my identity to secure the funds, it is also identity theft. I filed the report an hour ago." I provided them with the original documents and the forensic handwriting analysis. As if on cue, the heavy oak doors swung open again. This time, it was not a waiter or a lawyer. It was 4 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in plain clothes. The room instantly shrank. The air grew heavy with the scent of impending incarceration. "Jason Reed," one of the detectives asked, holding up a badge. And Robert Thorne dropped his briefcase. "I am an attorney. You cannot just arrest me without a warrant." "We have a warrant. Mr. Thorne," the detective replied, snapping handcuffs onto Thorne's wrists. "And we have your emails discussing the bribery of a notary public." Jason did not fight. He went limp, letting the officer pull his arms behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Sarah stood in the corner, pressing herself against the velvet wallpaper as if trying to merge with it. She was shaking violently. When the officers began to lead the men away, she let out a sob and lunged toward me. "Ilara, Ilara." "Wait," she screamed, tears ruining her expensive makeup. I did not sign anything. You cannot let them take me. I am your sister. Please, do not let them arrest me." I held up a hand to stop the officers. They paused, looking at me. I turned my gaze to Sarah. She looked small and pathetic, stripped of her arrogance. "You are an accomplice." "Sarah," I said, holding up the transcript of her text messages. "Conspiracy to commit fraud. You are looking at 5 to 10 years. No. Please," she wailed, falling to her knees. "I will do anything you want. Just do not send me to jail." I reached into my bag and pulled out one final document. It was a single page, dense with legal text. "This is a waiver," I said, holding it out to her. "It states that you voluntarily renounce any and all future claims to Mom and Dad's estate. It also contains a full confession that you conspired with Jason to defraud me. You sign this, and I tell the detectives that you were a reluctant witness who is cooperating with the investigation. You do not sign, And you leave in handcuffs with your boyfriend." Sarah did not hesitate. She did not look at Jason. She did not look at the lawyer. She snatched the pen from my hand with trembling fingers. "I will sign. I will sign it," she cried out. "Sarah, do not!" Jason shouted from the doorway, his voice cracking with betrayal. "We are in this together. You said you loved me." Sarah looked up, her face twisted in a snarl. "Shut up, Jason. This is all your fault. You are the one who ruined everything. I never should have listened to a loser like you." She scribbled her signature on the line, pressing so hard the pen almost tore the paper. Jason stared at her, his eyes wide with horror. In that moment, the love or whatever twisted version of lust and greed they shared died a violent death. He realized he had destroyed his life for a woman who would sell him out for a signature. "Get them out of here," I said to the detectives, turning my back on my husband, as the police dragged a weeping Jason and a silent Thorne out of the room. I looked at the paper in my hand. It was done. I looked at Sarah, who was still kneeling on the floor, clutching her chest. Am I safe?" she whimpered. "Safe from jail." "Yes," I said, putting the document in my briefcase. "But you are not welcome here." I signaled to my security guard. "Tiny, escort this woman off the premises," I ordered. "Do not let her go through the lobby. Take her out the back door, through the alley next to the dumpsters. That is where trash belongs." "Ilara," Sarah whispered. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said, picking up a glass of wine. Tiny grabbed Sarah by the arm and hauled her to her feet. She did not fight him. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with fear, before she was marched out toward the kitchen. I stood alone in the VIP room. The air was quiet. The champagne was still bubbling in their abandoned glasses. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of victory. It smelled like expensive perfume and absolute freedom. The fallout was swift and absolute. Jason sat in a holding cell at Cook County Jail, unable to post the $50,000 bail. It was a pathetic sum for a man who pretended to be a high roller, but his reality had crashed into his facade. Every account he had access to was either frozen by the federal investigation or drained by his own stupidity. He was destitute. News traveled fast in Chicago. By Monday morning, Jason's reputation was not just tarnished, it was incinerated. The business partners who had once tolerated his arrogance now treated him like a radioactive isotope. I heard from a contact that his LinkedIn profile was being mocked in group chats across the city. He was no longer a businessman, he was a punchline. Sarah fared no better. I did not need to scream to ruin her. I simply sent a polite, sorrowful email to our extended family aunts, uncles, and cousins, explaining that I could unfortunately not attend the upcoming reunion because I was dealing with the legal aftermath of Sarah and Jason's attempt to defraud me. I attached the police report as a PDF. The silence from the family was immediate, followed by the shunning. Sarah was uninvited from Thanksgiving, Christmas, and every birthday in between. She was isolated, branding herself a pariah with her own greed. My financial counterattack continued. The bank that held the fraudulent second mortgage on our home was eager to offload the toxic asset. I bought the debt through my holding company for cents on the dollar. Technically, I was now the bank that was foreclosing on my own husband. I initiated the auction process immediately. I wanted the house sold. I wanted the physical container of our marriage liquidated and turned into cold, hard cash. On the third night of his incarceration, my phone rang. It was a collect call from the correctional facility. I usually ignore unknown numbers, but I wanted to hear this. I accepted the charges. Ilara, Jason's voice was barely a whisper, cracked and terrified. "Ilara, are you there?" I sat in the living room, a glass of vintage red wine in my hand. "I am here. Jason, you have to get me out." He sobbed, the sound wet and desperate. "Please, I am scared. There are guys in here. They know I owe money to Vinny. They are looking at me. I think." I think they are going to hurt me tonight. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. That sounds frightening. It is. It is hell, he cried, his breathing ragged. Just post the bail. I will sign anything. I will leave the country. Please, just help me. You signed your rights away when you forged my name, I said calmly. Good luck with Vinny. I hung up before he could beg again. Robert Thorne was the next domino to fall. The Bar Association moved with unusual speed, given the undeniable evidence I had provided. He was stripped of his license to practice law permanently. Without his license, he was nothing but a criminal in a cheap suit facing a 20-year sentence for racketeering and fraud. With the legal threats neutralized, I turned my attention to the prize they had coveted so desperately, my grandmother's land. I petitioned the court to remove any potential claims Sarah might have had, using her signed confession. The judge granted me sole, uncontested ownership. I immediately commissioned an architect to design a community center and women's shelter on the site. I named it the Eleanor Project, after my grandmother. Sarah's name would never be associated with the legacy. She was erased. The final act of cleansing took place on a Saturday. I hired a team of movers, but I gave them specific instructions. We went into the master closet. I pulled out every Armani suit, every pair of Italian leather shoes, and every silk tie Jason owned. Where are these going? Ma'am, one of the movers asked. Storage. No, I replied, tossing a $3,000 tuxedo into a black garbage bag. Take them to the downtown homeless shelter. Tell them I want the men on the street wearing better clothes than the man who used to live here. I watched them haul the bags away. The penthouse was finally empty of his presence. It was just me, the view of the skyline, and the silence of a war that I had won without firing a single shot. The silence in my penthouse was no longer heavy. It was crisp, clean, and entirely mine. For years, I had equated a full house with a full life, filling the rooms with Jason's clutter and Sarah's drama just to avoid the quiet. Now, sitting on my white sofa with a cup of tea that was exactly the temperature I liked, I realized the noise had not been affection. It had been interference. The apartment felt vast, not because it was empty, but because there was finally room for me to breathe. I was no longer walking on eggshells. I was walking on marble I had paid for, and it felt solid beneath my feet. My return to work was met not with pity, but with a terrifying amount of respect. Sterling, the CEO of Obsidian Shield, called me into his office on Tuesday morning. He did not ask about my emotional state. He slid a contract across his glass desk. I heard about the hostile takeover of your personal assets, Sterling said, leaning back in his chair. You handled that with the kind of surgical precision we usually charge our clients millions for. You cut out the cancer and kept the host alive. That is the kind of ruthlessness I need on the executive floor. I looked at the salary figure. It was a 40% increase. I accept, I said, signing the paper without blinking. Good. Sterling nodded. Welcome to the partnership, Alara. Try not to scare the interns. With my career secured, I turned my attention to fortifying my castle. I spent the weekend overhauling my digital and physical existence. I hired a private security firm to sweep the penthouse for any remaining bugs or trackers. I changed every lock to biometric scanners that required a retinal match. I reset every password to a randomized string of 30 characters. My financial accounts were now locked behind 3 layers of authentication. I was no longer just a woman. I was a fortress. No one would ever sneak up on me again. That evening, I met Julian at a quiet jazz bar in the Loop. Julian was not a lover, nor was he a prospect. He was a forensic accountant I had worked with for years, a man who found comfort in the absolute truth of numbers. He was the only one I trusted to understand the victory without judging the cruelty. To the clean slate, Julian said, raising his whiskey glass. To the scorched earth, I corrected him, clinking my glass against his. I heard your sister tried to contact the front desk at the firm today, Julian mentioned casually. She was asking for gas money. I took a slow sip of my drink. She is blocked on my phone. She is blocked on my email. She is blocked from my building. If she wants money, she can get a job. I hear the prison cafeteria is hiring. Julian chuckled. You are cold, Ilara. I am efficient, I replied. I spent 32 years trying to be the good sister and the supportive wife. I thought my value lay in how much I could give, or how much I could forgive. I was wrong. My value is in what I build and what I protect. When I returned home that night, I found a single photograph I had missed during the purge. It was a wedding photo, tucked inside a book on the mantel. Jason and I looked so young, so hopeful. I looked at the girl in the white dress and I did not recognize her. She was naive. She thought love was a safety net, not a liability. I walked over to the gas fireplace and flipped the switch. The flames roared to life, orange and hungry. I did not rip the photo. I did not cry over it. I simply tossed it onto the logs. I watched the edges curl and blacken. The image of Jason's smiling face bubbled and melted away, turning into ash that floated up the chimney. It was a funeral for the woman I used to be. As the last corner of the photograph disintegrated, a new sensation settled in my chest. It was not happiness, exactly. It was power, for the first time in my life. I was not reacting to someone else's script. I was the one holding the pen. I was the one making the rules, and God help anyone who tried to break them. 3 months later, the federal courthouse smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. I sat in the witness stand wearing a white tailored suit that cost more than Jason's first car. I had chosen white deliberately. It was not the color of surrender. It was the color of a blank slate, a new beginning that I had carved out of the wreckage of my marriage. Jason sat at the defense table. He looked like a ghost of the man I had once vowed to love. His hair was thinning, his skin was a sallow gray, and he had aged 10 years in 90 days. When our eyes met, he flinched. He looked for pity in my gaze, but he found only the reflection of his own ruin. The prosecutor was ruthless. He laid out the evidence I had provided with surgical precision: the forged signatures, the wire transfers, the audio recordings of them mocking me. It was all there. He demanded the maximum sentence for credit fraud and grand larceny. This was not a momentary lapse of judgment, the prosecutor argued, pointing a finger at Jason. This was a calculated, predatory attempt to destroy a spouse for financial gain. In the gallery, sitting alone in the back row, was Sarah. She wore a cheap wool coat and kept her head down. She had lost her job at the catering company when the scandal broke. Her friends had abandoned her. She was a pariah, isolated by her own envy. She did not dare look at me. When it was my turn to speak, my voice did not waver. I looked directly at the jury. He stole my identity, I stated clearly. He stole my trust. He tried to have me declared incompetent so he could steal my heritage. He did not just want my money, he wanted to erase me. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for con artists, delivered the verdict we all knew was coming. Jason Reed. I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison, she declared, the gavel hanging in the air like a guillotine. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay full restitution of $300,000 plus interest to the victims. You will not know a day of financial freedom until this debt is paid. It was a life sentence disguised as a 5-year term. He would emerge from prison a middle-aged man with no credit, no assets, and a mountain of debt he could never climb. As the bailiffs moved to shackle him, Jason turned toward me. His eyes were wet with tears. Ilara. Please, I am sorry, he cried out, his voice cracking. I love you. Don't leave me like this. I did not turn my head. I did not blink. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the double doors without breaking my stride. My driver was waiting at the curb, holding open the door of the black limousine. I slid into the cool leather seat and pulled out my phone. I scrolled back through my messages until I found it. The text from that night 3 months ago. Stuck at Mom's for dinner. She is talking too much, so I cannot leave early. Love you. I looked at it one last time. A digital relic of a life that no longer existed. I smiled, a small, private curve of the lips, and pressed delete forever. The message vanished, taking the last of my anger with it. Where to? Ms. Reed, the driver asked. The Gilded Fork. I replied, I have a reservation at the owner's table. An hour later, I sat on the private balcony of my restaurant. The wind off Lake Michigan played with my hair. I raised a glass of the same vintage red wine I had been drinking the night I caught them. Below me, the lights of Chicago glittered like diamonds scattered on black velvet. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was free. I had taken the wreckage of my betrayal and built a throne. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like victory. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people.